And the more we untangle this truth, the clearer it becomes that battles are snapshots, while wars are lifetimes. Because a battle is an encounter that begins and ends. However violent, however devastating, it is a bounded moment. But a war consumes years, consumes futures, consumes the very idea of what people thought their lives would be. Because in war there is no guarantee of tomorrow being different than today. In war every sunrise feels like a continuation of the same nightmare. And that is why the distinction is not just about scale. It is about meaning. Because a battle is about winning ground, but a war is about redefining existence. And you can see this in how memory works. Because survivors of a battle often recall details: the color of the smoke, the sound of a comrade's last breath, the panic of a charge. But survivors of war speak less in details and more in feelings, in atmospheres, in the heaviness of years, the hunger, the fear, the endless waiting, the hopelessness that creeps in when you realize that one battle won does not end the suffering. Because tomorrow there will be another, and another, and that is what breaks people. Not the single act of violence, but the knowledge that the violence will not end. And this is why even the most victorious wars leave behind broken people. Because to survive war is not to escape unscathed. It is to carry scars too deep to see. And when you study the history of humanity, you notice that every war has its decisive battles, but every decisive battle only matters because of the war. Because if there is no wider war, then the clash is simply an isolated conflict, a skirmish remembered by a few. But when placed inside the larger struggle, the battle becomes legendary, because it becomes part of the story of survival or collapse. And this is why people chant the names of Waterloo or Gettysburg or Stalingrad, not because they were battles alone, but because they were battles that turned wars, battles that bent the direction of history. And this makes it clear that war and battle are tied, dependent, interconnected, but never the same. Because battles are the visible eruptions, but war is the underlying earthquake. Battles are the eruptions of violence, but war is the tectonic pressure that makes those eruptions inevitable. And that is why thinking about war as only a collection of battles misses the point. Because war has dimensions that battles cannot capture, like propaganda, famine, disease, displacement, political manipulation, and generational trauma, none of which fit neatly into the description of a battlefield clash. And if you consider the way war reaches into every corner of life, you see why this distinction matters. Because when war arrives, even those far from the front lines become participants. The farmer who loses his crops to requisition, the child who grows up fatherless, the mother who waits endlessly for news, the worker whose factory is repurposed for weapons, the artist whose brush turns to propaganda, the teacher whose classroom becomes a shelter, the civilian whose home becomes rubble. And all of this is war, not battle, because a battle cannot explain the way an entire society bends and reshapes under the strain. But war does. War encompasses that totality. And this is why the greatest danger is to think of war as just fighting. Because then we forget the hunger, the exile, the silence, the grief. And if we forget that, we risk making the mistake of thinking wars are short, clean, and winnable with just courage and steel, when in truth wars are long, messy, and corrosive, and their victories taste of ash even for the winners. Because there is no war without loss, no war without collateral suffering, no war without generations asking why. And that is what sets war apart from battle. Because a battle might break a regiment, but a war breaks a culture. And if you follow this line of thought far enough, you begin to understand why so many who study war say that war has no true victors, only survivors. Because even when a nation declares victory, it buries its dead, rebuilds its cities, carries its trauma, while the other side does the same in defeat. And that haunting symmetry is part of the reason we must be precise with our words. Because to call a battle a war is to trivialize the depth of what war really is. And yet to forget battles is also to miss the way war becomes tangible. Because war in its vastness is sometimes too big for the human mind. But a battle gives it form, gives it flesh, gives it names and faces. And that is why we cling to battles in memory. Because they are the human-sized windows into the monstrous scale of war. And still, they are not the same. They cannot be the same. And if you have ever felt despair, you know the difference, because despair does not come from a single wound, but from the unending accumulation of wounds. And that is what war is. The unending, the relentless, the erosion of hope, the grinding down of spirit. While a battle, however terrible, is a storm that eventually passes, and though it leaves scars, it leaves at least the possibility of calm. But war does not give calm. War denies calm. It stretches pain across seasons and generations, until even the concept of peace feels alien. And that is why even long after wars end, people struggle to live in peace, because war changes the soil itself. It changes the language. It changes the rituals. It changes what people believe about themselves. And in this way, war is not just violence. It is transformation. And that is the difference, the brutal difference, that war is transformation through violence, while battle is violence without necessarily transformation. And when you let that sink in, you see why humanity must remember this distinction, because only then can we truly appreciate the price of war. Only then can we measure its cost, and only then can we remind ourselves that battles may be inevitable in a broken world. But wars are choices that leaders make, choices that generations pay for, choices that are too often made without understanding that what is being risked is not just a fight, but the soul of a people. And in this sense, the difference between war and battle is not only descriptive but moral, because battles are sometimes forced, thrust upon us in moments of survival, but wars are decisions, escalations, extensions, and the people who suffer them most are rarely the ones who decided them. And that injustice is why we must speak clearly, why we must never let the word war be used lightly, because when someone says war, they are speaking of something far beyond battle. They are speaking of an all-consuming force that will leave behind scars deeper than any single clash ever could. And that truth should chill us, should slow us, should make us hesitate before invoking war as if it was simply another contest. Because war is not a contest. It is catastrophe stretched into years. It is despair institutionalized. It is violence multiplied until it becomes the air itself. And to confuse it with battle is to forget what it does, to forget the way it poisons everything it touches. And to forget is dangerous, because forgetting makes it easier to start again. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch the next part, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating more content for you. And by subscribing, you'll be the first to know when the next part is uploaded.